Now, some of us are going to be using, perhaps half-inch MDF or maybe even some other sheet good in order to make our bones materials. Now, realize what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be cutting little 2-inch strips, anywhere from half-inch to 2-inch strips off of this material. And because these sheets are very heavy, the trick is you just cut right down the middle of it to begin with, and then that effectively cuts the weight of it in half and makes the sheet a whole lot easier to deal with. Now, I'm not going to be using MDF. That's actually a piece of plywood I'm cutting for some shelves that I'm building around the shop. But that's just a little trick I think that'll help you out. These things get really heavy and they're hard to handle, and it's kind of tough to cut little dinky strips off of them. Now, I always use redwood for my bones material, which is, of course, looks great and it's very light, but it's also quite expensive. And what I want to do now is I want to rip those pieces that are shown there in the red circle there on a cutting list. As it turns out, it's going to take at least a couple pieces of this redwood in order to do that. I just ripped a 7/8 inch piece, and now we're going to do a couple of 2-inch pieces. Now, I'm accelerating these videos for you a little bit, just because it's kind of boring to sit there and watch somebody cut something. So you see what we have there is two 2 inches and one 7/8 inch piece. And now I'm going to cut the 1.5 inch strips. I like to cut those off the sides of the pieces. So now we've ended up with 2 1.5 inch strips and 2 1-inch strips. Now, a little hint for you there, if you do end up using redwood, you might have to make those 1-inch strips just slightly less, maybe about a 1/16 of an inch less than 1 inch. Doesn't really matter the way they're used. And I'm also going to need a 3/8 inch strip and a couple of 1/2 inch pieces. Now, one of the 1/2 inch pieces I actually want to be 1/2 by 1/2. Since my redwood is 5/8 inches thick, that means I'm going to have to trim off that extra 1/8 of an inch in order to make this a 1/2 by 1/2. And what I'm going to use that for, it's not actually on the cutting list, but what I'm going to use that piece for is to make the braces that I use on the drawer and compartment shelves. And that's also the first place we're going to start cross-cutting. So now we have all the bone strips cut, and we can begin cross-cutting them to length. And again, these pieces right here I'm actually cross-cutting at 13 3/8. They're really for the shelves, which not everybody will do, so I don't put these on the cutting list. But every box I make has shelves for both the drawers and in the main compartment as well. Now, as we cut, we're going to want to match these pieces up with their corresponding plywood pieces. So right here, we're doing the 2-inch pieces, and there are 4 at 17 inches. We're also going to want to do 4 at 13 3/8 inch. So we're over on the right side of the cutting list now. We did all the plywood pieces in the last video. Now we're doing the bones materials. And again, I kind of cheat a little bit here and accelerate through this stuff. It's a little bit like watching paint dry. But I hope you get the idea how this cutting list concept works. I just set that at 24.5 inches. So what we're going to do is we're going to cut 1.5 pieces and a 1-inch piece as well. So it's 2 up at the top of the right side. And since they're the same length, I might as well just cut them both together. These are braces for the stand. And again, notice how we're taking and matching these redwood pieces to the plywood pieces that they're going to go with. So right now I think we're going to want to make the stand end redwood pieces. This is going to be the legs. They're 17.5 inches long. Some of you might notice that I know this stuff right off the top of my head. I don't have to actually look on a piece of paper for it. I've made so many of these boxes that it's just memorized. Now there's some other things we're going to need to do to these pieces before we actually put them together as parts, but I'll get to that when we do the parts assembly process. Now, one of the things I'd point out is you don't actually have to use a cutting list. You could build just from the detailed drawings as well. But this just makes it a little bit easier to do. Like right now we're doing the 14.25 inch cross members of the stand ends. And so you see, using the cutting list, it just makes it a whole lot faster to do. It looks to me like we've got some door pieces that we're going to have to do. That's a 3/8 inch thick piece, and this is going to be the door piece bones material. That's set at 17 3/8. We need 2 of those, 1 for each door. And then we're going to need 4 at 14 inches. And again, it's just right off the cutting list. Now, I can see some dummy forgot to put these 2 pieces on the cutting list. And if this ever happens to you, you come across a drawing, you don't have all your pieces there, then obviously you're going to have to do something else. I'm sure I'll get that fixed at some moment in time, but those pieces I just cut were 14.5 inches long, and they're used on the center partition. Now what I'm doing now is I'm cutting the grooves for the tops and bottoms. And the way now you don't have to do it this way. You could actually, of course, use a router table. If you had a router table, would be one way to do it. But I think all of us have a table saw, so I'm going to show you how to do it with the table saw. And the trick here is we're just going to adjust the height of the blade and the fence so that we don't necessarily cut all the way through the wood, and thereby we can make a groove. You'll notice, of course, that saw blade is not on right now. It's turned off. And the thing is, I'm just eyeballing it to get the height of it right. The piece I'm using there is another runner that I've made, and I actually have a whole bunch of those sitting off in the corner of the shop for when I get orders in. But you're going to want to measure that particular groove and just measure it with your tape measure. As it turns out, I think it's 5/16 by 3/8 of an inch groove. And I just want to caution you to be very careful about where you measure too. In some cases you have to measure to the inside of the blade, and in this case though you want to measure to the outside of the blade. So that looks pretty good to me. I'll go ahead and finish making this last cut on it, and what we'll end up with is a long strip that has a groove in it. Now you could, of course, cut the pieces to 23 7/8 first and then do each of them individually, but I just find this is a little bit quicker way to go. Once we have our groove, we like it, then all we have to do is cross cut 4 23 7/8 inch pieces, and life will be good. We'll be done with our manufacturing the pieces proposition, although there are a couple special little guys that we haven't made yet, but I'll show you how to do those individually. So pretty much well, for example, that stand stop piece we haven't made yet. There are actually a couple other ones too. But that does it for our manufacturing of pieces. Now we're ready to put those pieces together as parts.